Well, I was gonna think of something to do, and now I'm not.
So you a rear or a chest guy?
Is this a Dungeons and Dragons question or a?
No, I'm talking about working out.
How do you work out your rear specifically? Because I
Glutes.
mean, like squats does it's more than
Begin those squats.
that. You expect me to give you some of this? Is that what I'm hearing?
No,
You
I
reached
hate
for,
that nonsense.
You reached for your cup as if it was like pour me
No,
some.
I'm gonna get my own something.
I'll admit, this could go south. I could be having an Indian in the cupboard. That's a euphemism that doesn't pan well, unless you get the reference.
I could be having an Indian in the cupboard. That makes it sound like you're hiding some sort of a racism behind. Oh, that's gonna be the new thing.
Well, I think it's
man,
it's an apt way of
that
putting
is
it, but
very BlackBerry.
I suppose I ought to give the reference of what that means, or perhaps you should, because it was your reference. Oh, that's syrupy. That does not taste. That doesn't smell like real blackberries. Is it a blackberry flavor?
Certain looks like a something.
Well, this is, you can't see it, but this is the neon drinks hour today. I used to like this blue bubble gum from Jones, but there is a part of me that wonders if, like, was it just because I was a kid and it was novel? Am I going to hate it now?
Mine is a classic Northwest beverage that I actually ended up nailing down the cream soda for, which is Bedford's, but this one is Marionberry cream, and I'm a little bit off-put right now by the scent. We'll see.
I don't think it smells bad, but it does smell quite synthetic.
It's not good either. I think I may be drinking motor oil.
I don't think it's bad. It just feels like it's very fake syrupy. This is a lot less poignant.
Nope, it's motor oil.
Like, I taste the bubble gum, but it feels like a single half-chewed piece in a big vat of Sprite.
I'm pretty sure that's a 50 weight.
Okay.
That's like... Phew. Well, Bedford's does nothing subtly, I'll tell you that.
Well, I would argue that their cream soda is subtler than most. Because, like, Doc Brown's is my cream soda, and that's very sugary.
Wow, that's like punch you in the face flavor.
What's in that?
Good night, nurse.
I am going in a Sherlock Holmes arc.
Okay. Does he like rears or chests?
By which I mean one day you'll open the door and I'll be hanging from the ceiling fan.
That's terrible.
I say this, of course, deliberately to provoke a funny reaction. But you might understand why when I explain.
Is that your answer, but? You finally admitted it?
I like faces because I'm a humanist and I want to connect with the soul underneath.
I think you're just digging yourself into a grave.
I'm being deliberately, like, what's the word?
Oh,
obsequious.
Dear. That's funny. All right, go ahead.
It's gone. No, I'm just jumping straight into it. So, I am curious about the possibility of deliberately inducing one's own hallucinations.
By holding your breath. That's a good way of doing it.
Actually?
Mm-hmm.
That seems like a good way of passing out, which might then lead to hallucinations secondarily, but...
Well, there's
Like,
a whole...
I'd rather skip straight to the hallucinations and not avoid the passing out, if that's at all possible.
Well, then you just need
Well,
LSD.
let me give the full context, because it's a bit of an odd confluence of things.
I tried LSD for the first time this week.
Well, okay, I should clarify by doing this in a non-illegal fashion. Because I'll start with, I'll take a slight detour and I'll leave you on the hook and bring you back with this later. Are you familiar with the phrase, with the concept of aphantasia? Does that ring a bell?
The name sounds familiar, but you'll have to hum a
It
few
is
bars.
the condition of being unable to imagine in your mind's eye. I did not realize had a condition.
Certain people think in purely verbiage.
Well, no, that's not what it strictly means.
I'm talking about the people that literally cannot. For me, the way I live my life, I picture things.
There's the difference
I
between
frame
internal
things
monologue and things like that.
Oh,
but
yeah,
that's not
maybe
what-
that's what I'm
but
thinking.
But aphantasia is an inability to imagine. It's difficult to, because I can't say it's an inability to imagine anything, but the classic example of like close
Visually.
your eyes and visualize
Right,
a thing.
it's visually
It's
not
being incapable of doing that, which I was not aware there was a condition, because I didn't think anyone could do that. Because I apparently probably have this thing.
That's interesting.
Because
You can't visualize.
well, it's an odd, because when people say the phrase visualize, I never took it to mean literally see, because it's very much more like a vague sense. It's
I
not
find
a
this
literal
hard to believe
sight.
because
It's literal.
you spend like multiple hours doing like thought experiments and things of that nature within.
Well, that's
your...
not visual.
Oh, sure,
Thought-
but I mean,
like
there's
thinking-
like for instance, when you talk about Schrodinger's cat, I can see the cat in the box and doing the whatever.
Well,
You
but
don't-
here's the thing: I
you
can
don't?
think abstractly, definitely, but I'm not seeing the things I'm thinking about. Because so it's like the example that people gave. It's like if you say to someone, "Close your eyes and think of an apple."
Okay.
What I would describe the sensation is similar to how astronomers can know a planet exists without seeing it because they can see the effects it has on other things. I have a similar sensation where it's almost as if I'm imagining not what the sight would be, but what my neurological response to the sight would be. And that sounds very strange. But it's essentially like I can imagine the weight of it. I can imagine the colors that it would be, and the shape. But that doesn't. But it's not a visual thing. It's almost as if I'm shortcutting the sense and going straight to a neurological response, as if you could induce the. There's no word, at least that I'm aware of, for this description. But essentially, there is actually. Well, I suppose I'll bring up a thought experiment because apparently that's just what I do now, is for reference thought experiments. It's not unlike the Chinese room, except it's slightly different. The concept of Mary, the blue scientist.
I don't know if I'm familiar.
It
with
sounds
that
much
at all.
more bizarre, but let me explain it. Essentially, the idea is...
Essentially, there's a blue scientist and her name is Mary.
No, it's the opposite. Imagine there is this woman who is a renowned scientist, and she knows everything there is to know about the color blue, in that she could define its... like the wavelengths of light that blue occupies, and the various the gases that it. And
That would be very difficult
things
because
that
your blue
fluoresce.
is not my blue. I mean, it's like
That's another philosophical thought experiment which is unproven. So that
it's not unproven.
yes, it is,
Well, okay.
because it can by nature not be proven. That's one of those things where I think it's kind of useless.
No, there's a whole phenomenon about the whole blue versus white dress deal.
That
and
was
that's-
that was explained though for other reasons, because that was an optical illusion.
It's
That
an
was-
optical illusion, but some people see it one way and the other people
Yes,
see
but
it the
that's
other.
the nature of
And I'm just-
optical illusions. It's the duck or the rabbit thing. That's also an optical illusion.
Well, but that
And it has an explanation. My point is that was explained neurologically or as an optical illusion. I'm saying you can never. There is no proof to the idea of like what if this is to me a different color than it is to you, but we both say it's the same thing. There's no way to prove it, so it's a useless thought experiment in my mind.
I suppose.
But the point is, she would know all that there is to know about like even the cones and rods in your eyes and how they react to the color blue. She knows about the neurology, like what does the color blue cause to happen in your brain. But the crux of
Opposed to
this
red,
is
which is an evil color.
no. The
apparently.
crux of this is she is colorblind and can't actually see the color blue. Then the question is, does she really know everything there is to know? Because the one thing she doesn't know is the subjective experience of blue.
Right, she hasn't experienced blue, but
And this is, I guess, I say all of this roundabout as a way of saying, when I think of the concept of like, oh, visualize a thing, I feel like I'm going straight to the like, I know all of the neurological things of like, if I were to look at an apple and hold it, I know all of the things that it would cause my brain to do, in the sense that like I can imagine how heavy it would be, and I know the shape that it would have and what the texture would be. But there's not like, oh, I close my eyes and I see it. Because I didn't think that people actually could do that. I always thought it was more of an abstract, like you're thinking of the concept of an apple, not I'm closing my eyes and actually I see the apple. Because I admit that was like, I always assumed that was like a superpower. And so when I first saw this video that I was like, oh, you did, what's this concept of aphantasia? I was like, I don't know. I was like, oh, okay. Apparently, and this is not normal. So, that's the foundation. on a separate note, okay, one more detail before I jump to the separate note. There was at least a suggested
That's the first note.
study that was the idea that the ability to visualize is not necessarily a binary can you do it or can you not, but it is perhaps a skill that can be developed. And so there was someone who put forth this idea that the way you could train your mind to actually be able to visualize, they call it visual streaming, which is essentially you have to start by closing your eyes and causing some form of a visual stimulus, such as the fact like when you rub your eyes in the morning and you get like the weird light effects that happens. Yeah. You start by doing that. You would then record yourself effectively just reading, like speaking aloud what it is you're seeing, even if it's only vague shapes. Because it's the theory was it's not, they sort of suggested it was not unlike lucid dreaming, in that the way you start to have lucid dreams is that you first have to become conscious of the dreams, which means that the way most people recommend if you want to start lucid dreaming is you need to start journaling your dreams. And eventually you record what occurs in your dream so that when you're in a dream, you can recognize it's a dream, and then you start practicing influencing the dream, and then once you do that enough, you can actually control the dreams. The idea is that this is similar, so that once you first start categorizing the things that you naturally see when you close your eyes, you can then start to exert influence over that and then perhaps be able to actually control it. So that's all curious. I was like, oh, that might be something worth trying. But on a whole nother related field is the concept of Otto Gansfeld, which is, this is the method of inducing hallucinations. Because essentially, and this is actually proven, it has a pseudoscientific element because some people tried to say that, it could be used for like psychic communication, and that was all bunk. But it is actually possible to induce hallucinations by this method. Because essentially the theory is, it's not theory, but the practice is, you cover your eyes with some kind of a diffusive material, and in fact the original test, they did it with a ping pong ball cut in half.
Okay.
You put that over your eyes and then shine a colored light so that, because the ping pong ball is white and it's covering your eyes, it will basically diffuse the color evenly so that your entire visual field is filled with this light and there's no variance. There's no shadows in any area or slight difference in color.
What is this one called again?
Otto Gansfeld.
Is this the one that we...
The guy did have...
It was
part of the...
He talked about wanting to do it, but he was nervous about it because some people do the weird...
I don't remember him saying anything about that. Because there was an element that this was also part of like the MK Ultra when they thought you could use this to psychically communicate. But that was the conspiracy theory element. The science of it, of like this will actually induce hallucinations, is valid. Because essentially when you are... It's almost like a hacked version of a sensory deprivation.
Right.
Where rather than total separate sensory deprivation, which is very difficult to achieve, it's deprivation via overstimulation.
Well, it's SOS.
What's essentially when your field of vision, this is in fact what Gansfeld means, it means entire field, is if your whole field of vision is one uniform color with no variance, your eyes, because they're trained to find differences in things, will start finding differences that aren't there.
Right.
And you also supplement this by wearing headphones and playing static. So your ears are doing the same thing.
That's interesting.
So effectively, you're hacking your brain into a sensory deprivation where, because your brain tunes out monotonous, unchanging stimuli, which in the same sense that you don't notice when your fridge is making noise because it does it all the time, and so your brain just tunes it out. So your brain eventually starts to tune out both the colors and the sounds, and then you've effectively achieved a hacked version of a sensory deprivation. And when your brain is in that state, it starts to generate images because it's trying to find some kind of thing.
It's making sense of anything.
It's making sense of nothingness, and so that essentially then will result in some forms of hallucination.
Sure.
And so I was like, well, hey, what if you skip the weird rub your eyes and say what you see? What if you just went straight to, I'm going to induce hallucinations and then record what I see? Because theoretically, if the visual streaming concept works, the sights you see in your eyes and you rub your eyes is the same effectively neurological process as your brain just producing images. Because it's not like you'll hallucinate things. It's not the same as LSD where it's like you'll see weird fractal patterns. They call them mild hallucinations. Then that can mean literally it could be nothing more than sort of blob shapes. Or it could potentially take the form of more definite things, but not necessarily. But I was thinking,
if you're intentionally looking to define it, it's going to. In the same way that if you look at clouds.
But that's when I think, then surely this might not only be an effective substitute, but perhaps even a more effective substitute. Plus, I'm also just admittedly somewhat fascinated by hallucination as a concept. Like the fact that your brain does that at all is like...
Well, I mean, it makes sense that your brain
It does,
would look
but
for
then there's
meaning.
also a part of like, well... How much of it could you start to extrapolate subconscious metaphors within it? In the same sense that you could... I mean, it wouldn't be that unlike a dream, because a dream is essentially just a sleeping hallucination.
Sure.
It's your brain coming up with an image that you then later sort of try to make sense of. So I'm curious, because I think there's a bit of a house curiosity in me where it's like if you could hallucinate on purpose so that you could... have interactions with your subconscious. I'm interested in lucid dreaming for the same reason.
Yeah.
There are people who are literally like, yeah, I have dreams about people who will tell me their reflections of my subconscious and tell me things and I'll ask them questions and they'll answer. It's like, that's fascinating and weird. And I think that would just be really interesting.
There's no ability to validate that is my problem. And there is a lot of people that would just simply
what would you need
lean
validation
in
for?
No, but I'm saying there's a lot of people that would just lean into that simply for the sensational sake of it.
Well, you can't deny that dreams have subconscious elements.
Yes, but my point is to communicate.
You can't take them on face value. That much is true.
To communicate that is to see. Your ego is still involved to some degree in that.
Well, yes. Your ego is involved in everything you do.
Yeah, but I'm just saying...
So is your subconscious, by the way.
Yes, but I'm saying to me, in order to communicate or to somehow see directly what's going on in your subconscious, you have to remove any
the ego
judgment of...
Well, judgment? What do you mean by judgment? I mean, you kind of have to let it happen. You can't just go... You can't...
Right, but that... You're still manually having to shut off part of your brain that
I wouldn't say you have. No, I don't think you have
happen.
to shut it off. I think you just have to. It's a little bit like meditation that you have to sort of let it happen without.
Well, I suppose that's
without trying to force it. That would be true. But all I'm saying is I'm already curious about that concept, and then I heard about this other concept. I'm like, what if you combine them, and then I get to kill two birds with one stone? And this is my. Pretty soon I'll be injecting myself with sheep adrenaline.
You just want to kill birds, don't you?
What does that have to do with anything?
Does it really matter how many stones it takes?
I'll kidnap 1,000 birds. I'm just saying. I'm curious. So if you come in here and I'm strapped to this chair with weird sounds playing and I've got weird things on my face, this better be good. Anyways.
I would think that it would be more akin to me walking in and just pushing back the blinds after months going, your hedge needs trimming. Find might lend a machete to your intellectual thicket.
So if you ever come in here and something weird's going on, just
know that
just
you're
leave me
tripping
alone.
balls.
What would you even describe that as, though? I'm not tripping balls in that instance. I'm tripping something else.
Tripping light fantastic.
Okay, sure. Anyways, how bizarre does this sound to you?
Well, I mean, I've heard of the latter principle, but I don't know that I have really done a lot of... I didn't realize that the whole visual concept of not being able to visualize something was a thing. I mean, that's kind of a...
Well, see, it was the opposite. I didn't know that was actually a thing people could do. And again, it's a spectrum, because some people only have kind of like vague, fuzzy control where it's like, yeah, I can kind of see it, but I still would need to draw it out to see it more clearly.
See, mine is vivid.
There are some people who it's like, oh no, I could close my eyes and it's effectively a dream. And I'm like, if I could do that, it would be over for everybody else.
Wow,
it's
that's
like,
awfully sad.
I would just sit in a chair all day, be like, I'm just gonna have a dream. I'm just gonna daydream, Because why wouldn't you if you could? I didn't think people could do that.
Well, it's really interesting.
Perhaps that's why I can't do it, because I would never do anything else.
My introverted experience must be very different than yours then, because when I'm alone, I have...
See, when I'm alone, I think.
Sure.
Like that's
I mean, I do as well, but I don't know that I think in the same manner.
Well, because I don't fantasize, because...
Oh, I do, but I mean,
Well,
that makes it sound...
I haven't...
makes it sound more, like, odd than I mean it to, but I'm saying, like, I can picture things in my mind very vividly. People, locations, things... Like, if you say, visualize an apple, I can see it on a table sitting. I mean, I can see it wherever I want to see it.
Well, and then that's the other thing, is people have said that the more control you have, there are people who can do it while they're just looking at it. Like, they could be looking at a table and be like, I see it on the table right now. My eyes are closed. See it. And that's where I just go, that's weird. I always assumed that was always more of a figurative, like...
I mean, it's figurative.
Conceptually.
Obviously, my eyes don't see it. My brain recognizes my eyes don't actually perceive anything before them.
Well, then what is it?
But I can 100% see it.
Well, but see, you can't say both of those things. Those are contradictory statements. You have to somehow gel them.
You gel them.
Because again, I can imagine it such as, like, I could imagine what it would look like.
The way I would describe it is like you're superimposing, like what is that?
But that would imply that you could see it.
Yeah.
Like, to suggest that you can, like, I superimpose, but then you just got through saying I can't actually see it.
Your brain knows it's fake. There's no apple there. I'm
but
not fooled into somehow reaching out and trying to grab it.
See, this is where I also got into this weird rabbit trail. I was like, I wonder what would happen to me if I got schizophrenia. Because I feel like I would probably be the some kind of person who I'd be like, I know that it's not real. And in which case it would just be, I would just live a very weird life. But then again, maybe that, I don't mean to be insensitive, but it's like, because I don't know enough about it. Does the schizophrenia is part of schizophrenia the belief in what you see, or is it merely the seeing of things that aren't real?
No, there is actually...
Because I feel like if it's
there's
just
a guy that actually
it,
describes on, I believe it was YouTube, I was watching this video that said this is more what schizophrenia is like and how it functions, because everybody acts like it's the,
it's not the Gollum, like, I talk to myself, I hear voices.
Right, it's like that's not a thing. Like, even the beautiful mind thing, it's like, no, that's still not exactly the way that it is. But this guy describes, he made a video on, here's my day, off of
I don't know if it was this guy, but I've seen...
And it's like just random, like...
Shapes or like actual things?
Well, like shapes primarily, but like they'll make noises.
Because I've seen like
and he's
schizophrenic
like,
simulation videos where it's like... But even then, they were more definite things where it's like sometimes it would just be like, oh, there's a face in the corner and then it disappears and then it's...
Right. But he says...
But there's a part of it that's like, I don't know enough. It is involved in the disorder, the sort of paranoid belief in what you see, or could you actually be someone who's like, I maintain my rationality and I know that that's not there.
I would say that.
And yet you still see it.
I would say
because that would be
true.
really weird.
That would be weird.
And yet I also am like, I don't mean to be insensitive. It's like, if I could see that for a day, I would just be fascinated. Because that would be very strange. If you could because I mean... And again, like certain videos, I think do amp it up where it's like they make it deliberately, like, oh, you see weird, creepy people in the corner and they're strange figures and whatnot.
He's got an axe.
Well, yeah, like it wouldn't necessarily have to be that, but even if it was that would be because I think if you had to get used to that, like you never could go through any haunted house ever. Just be like, oh, I'm used to seeing scarier things than you all day, pal. Guy jumps out at you and I'd be like, is that a real one or is that me this time?
He just touches his face.
Because we're like, oh, that's you. Good job.
He look awfully convincing.
And you turn around and be like, whoa, and then there's nothing there. Like, this fascinates me. I think hallucinations on their own, I'm just like, it's such a weird thing that happens.
I wonder, though, that is really interesting because, so when you are by yourself, obviously thought experiment, those types of things, and obviously you know, we both read and things like that. But like, for instance, when you're reading a book,
I don't see it. It's a story. It's like it's a sequence of events.
Are you hearing it in your mind's eye?
That depends. Sometimes there's okay, but again, not audibly. Like I can imagine, like, oh, this is what I think that character might sound like, but it's not like, oh, I actually hear it. It's more like it's almost as if like if someone asked me to make a voice for this character, this is kind of what I would do. It's not like I'm hearing it done. I'm imagining what it would sound like if I just did it.
I must have a far more active imagination. So, the man who invented Christmas, 100% the way I see.
See, that's not because, well, no, the reason that film bothered me is because as someone who has at least moderate experience in creative writing, I'm like, that's not at all how it works.
Well, that may not be how it works for creative writing, but for me, as far as my imagination, that's 100% how I see. Like I'll visualize something. Again, I say it. It's the what's that tool? I cannot remember what it is called. It was fairly famous for old artists or artists of antiquity where they would use this
camera obscura or something like that.
Yeah, it was but it's called optica or something like that. It's like used.
No, it's called a camera obscura.
It's not camera. It's something else.
Yes, that's where the word camera is in the thing that takes pictures because it wasn't originally for pictures. It was originally for.
It's something where you can put an object or something like that, and it passes light through it, so you can look. And it's anyway. It's similar to that, though.
I think that it is what
it's not. But there's a different word that I'm particularly trying to nail down because it's not camera. I know that.
I think it is though because I think the reason modern cameras are called that is because of this thing. Yeah, camera obscura.
No, there's another thing though.
Small hole and a lens at one side through which an image is projected.
But it's
essentially it's the first way of projecting an image. That didn't have anything to do with film capture. It was just about moving. Yeah. It's like this idea that you could put a hole in a wall such that the thing outside of it would be projected on the wall and an artist would use that as a reference material.
Yeah, but I'll look it up because I know that there's something else that's more precise to what I'm getting at, but that it's essentially the same concept. But what I'm saying is that's how I would see the apple. Like that's how I'm
almost
visualizing.
As if like it's a hologram,
right? Like I'm visualizing the apple right there. Yes, exactly.
So it's like a holographic image that you can still see through it, but it's that. I suppose when you describe it that way, that sounds a little bit more like. But even then, you're describing it far more visually, where it's almost like I am. It's almost as if it's the opposite of rather than it being superimposed. It's almost as if it's. My actual visual field is being imposed onto what the mental concept of an apple is. But it doesn't cause a visual distortion. It's almost like it's a...
What do you mean?
I don't know how... It's a very difficult concept to describe because you can't ever explain exactly what you see such that you'll guarantee other people see it the same way.
I wonder if...
I would say that I find it easier... I actually would say I find it easiest to any visualization I do try to do is actually easier when my eyes are open than if I close my eyes, and I don't know why that would be, but for some reason it's almost as if having visual things around, I could almost manipulate it, but even then I don't think it's actual manipulation.
But I mean, I'm fascinated when you have. When you have...
This is one of the reasons I find it very difficult to draw without reference. It's because it's like I don't think of like, I imagine a scene and then I would just draw it so that the thing on the page matches my mind.
Maybe not for perfection, but I mean...
I can obviously do it, but the thing is I'm having to sketch loosely so that I go, this looks like what I think it should.
If I tell you draw a guitar...
Well, I can because I know what a guitar looks like. You can picture a guitar
in your head and draw it.
I know what a guitar looks like, so I can draw something that approximates a guitar. But it's not because I think it's not a platonic like this is the form of a guitar. It's just I know what it looks like, so I know what it should look like. But I don't. It's not like I don't know that I've done it when it matches what's in my mind. I know that I've done it when it looks like a guitar because I know what one looks like. That's what I mean when I say it's not a visual sight, but there is a stimulus. It's a little bit like how when you're in surgery, when they do brain surgery, they can actually like touch probes in parts of your brain where it's like,
and it stimulates the.
But it doesn't always inherently make you see things. Some people describe that it's essentially it's activating the same set of neurons that your eyes would activate, but your eyes aren't a part of it. So it's almost like you're having the sensation,
like for you,
because there is this. Dreams, I think, are different because dreams are not.
You just bring it. I mean, the definition of daydream is essentially what you do at night. You don't have
control over your dreams unless you practice that, which I have never. I've never gone through the rigorous.
That's fascinating to me. I agree with you. Lucid dreaming is far more.
You actually have to be quite rigorous.
Not just comprehensive, but also. What is it called? The word I'm looking for
I
is
also
escaping
don't dream
me.
that frequently, I admit.
Immersive? It's immersive,
I probably have
maybe?
a great deal less proper sleep habits, so that might be the
That's
reason.
certainly true. But I mean, like...
Because everybody dreams
Obviously,
basically all
night
the time, but I don't
dreaming-
remember dreams very
Night dreaming
often.
is far more immersive, but, like, to me, there's no difference in the way that my brain processes night dreams versus daydreams. The only difference is interruption and things during the day cause me not to. But if I literally sat down in a quiet room for an hour, but I was awake, I could daydream in the exact same manner that I could night dream.
So then why don't you? What are
I
you doing with that ability? Because I can tell you, I know what I would be doing with that ability. If I had a free holodeck, I'd be like, okay, I'd be all of my creative endeavors would be a great deal more fruitful. It would take less effort.
I mean, I don't...
As in, it would take less effort to...
which creative... Because I feel like you benefit.
If I could imagine
to
a story just happening before me, it's like literally I wouldn't even have to write the story. I would just be like, oh, and they'll just transcribe effectively. If you could essentially just stream of consciousness, like I imagine,
you're still the author.
You would be in either case, but in one it takes like, okay, I actually have to sit down and make it happen. Whereas if I could just say, I'll just sit and it will happen, and then I'll just write down what happens.
Well, it doesn't happen without my
Well, but a dream happens without your real
yeah, and
input,
that's the difference. Is a daydream requires my activation or my what is it called? It's birthed by my.
And I would also say this:
involvement.
it's not a strict because I have had oddly intense times when I have thought of a concept and actually been like, oh, that struck me so poignantly that I actually have some form of like a concept of what it would look like. But even then, I think the best way I could describe it is going back to the surgery comparison, where it's like the sense of sight. There is also an external or like a meta sense of sight that isn't just the things you see, but the actual effect of seeing them on your brain. It's kind of why I brought up the blue science thing comparison, where it's like,
well, but that's
you can
what I'm
know
describing.
a neurological effect, but that doesn't mean you'll see it. Like when they do the probe thing in surgery, people don't always describe that they saw a thing. They describe it as if, almost as if they should be seeing it, like their brain is convinced that they're seeing it, but their eyes aren't involved, so you're not actually seeing it, but like the neurons in your brain think you're seeing it.
I wonder though.
That's what it feels closest, where it's like I can imagine it in the sense that I could draw it and I could tell you this is not what it looks like, but I'm almost drawing it based on an abstract sense. Like it's almost as if I have in my brain, this is the neurological map of what seeing this would be like. And I could compare that neurological map with, like I could make a drawing and say this drawing creates the same neurological map. But on one case, I'm actually seeing the drawing, and in the other case, it's merely the abstract concept of what seeing it would be like for my brain.
I don't see. A part of me wonders though whether it's more about how you're experiencing and defining or interpreting that experience more than it is the actual experience itself.
Well, this is what the research I have done has shown. It's like there is nobody. The way people talk about the way they visualize things is not consistent, so it's hard to know what one person actually means and whether or not it applies. We're doing doubles this video?
Well, are we doing 3?
This is only 1. We started. This has only been half an hour.
Well, I'm saying, but this is 2. So
you're just saying, well, okay. I'm not saying you can't, but I'm just saying I thought you might have wanted to save it.
No, we'll get fun.
No.
That's my
I agree,
biggest
because some people describe that it's like... Because some people do describe it as if it's like a definite no, I absolutely clear as if it was a picture.
This is very white.
And some people describe it far more as like, no, it's more of a vague sense. And I suppose I would say I'm in the vague sense.
Yeah, but again, is that because of how we interpret... Like, I understand, and my brain's not fooled, again, into saying there's an actual apple that I see before me. That part is certainly true. My eyes aren't seeing anything. I still recognize that.
But you said the opposite earlier, so that's what confuses me. You have said contradicting statements, or so it seems.
Well, but it's not that it's contradictory. It's that
you can't say you see it and you don't. Unless you explain specifically what you mean by
stinted
that.
on you, but that's all right.
Yes, you did. I won't hold it too much against you. It smells kind of generically sweet.
Yeah, and it's also very, very clear.
Completely clear, which is quite odd. It looks like sparkling water. In fairness, I think I still had a little bit of bubblegum in there. That's not bad. There's not much to recommend it. It's very much like, it's cream soda. Generic brand cream soda.
No, it's worse than that.
I don't taste anything odd.
It's very
kind of just
flat and one-dimensional.
Yeah, but that's not... I wouldn't call that bad.
Sorry, Hank.
It's just kind of...
This one's Hank's, and I would not recommend you hanky-pank with Hank.
I mean, if someone served it for me as a cream soda, I'd be like, yeah, it's a cream soda. It doesn't taste like a bad cream soda.
Maybe.
But it's not like, oh, wow, what a great cream soda.
It's not good.
It's just like, grocery store generic brand cream soda.
Well...
This is platonic. It's platonic cream soda.
Hank would take offense because it's apparently gourmet.
Well, Hank isn't.
It's difficult because
I agree.
I'm trying to admit that the reality is, like, for instance, when I dream, when you're unaware of your own dreams, when you're dreaming in the evening or when you're asleep, the reason your body reacts on a visceral level, whether it be, on a, like when you're falling and you end up jolting awake or whatever it is because to your brain, there's reality to it at that point. That doesn't happen for me in a visualization sense. Like I can picture myself falling off a building, but it doesn't mean I'm actually seeing it so clearly that my brain goes, oh, when I hit the ground or when I fall off the, whatever. But I can picture it very clearly, and I would not say I'm just feeling the sensations of it as much as it is I am seeing it in my mind's eye.
But see, again, what does that mean? Because you just said that you don't actually see the apple when you see it.
Right.
But see, you can't say that you see something you don't see.
I'm seeing it in my mind's eye.
But see, what does that mean? Because now you're just substituting I see it, but I don't see it. Now you're just throwing in a new term.
So... third eye blind is what you are.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But you can't just make up a new word and go, well, it's the mind's eye. Well, what does that mean? It means I see it, but I don't. It's like,
But I mean, my initial description of trying to.
Well, the holographic thing was.
No, I'm saying trying to put it in the context of like, okay, here's what night dreaming looks like or whatever when it's not lucid dreaming, and here's what day dreaming or picturing something looks like. I would say the difference is your brain is able to be fooled because of how good the reality is or how close
now this is just the verisimilitude of it. Like, I could understand.
Sure.
But but how is that related? Because you're going like, yeah, obviously you're not so convinced that you see it that you actually would reach out and try to grab it.
Right.
But that's not the same as saying you don't physically see it.
That's
I mean, obviously, the concept of subjective vision is impossible to communicate unless you had one of those brain
I would not need a visual aid in order to draw an apple.
It's not that I would, but it would take me longer because I would have to... It would be iterations where it's like, okay, it would be something like this, and then I would refine it closer and closer and closer until it was finally what I know an apple should look like. But it's not like I see the apple, so I recreate the apple in the same sense that I can basically recreate any image because I have practiced that skill that I can make a drawing that looks a lot like an image. I could not do that of an imagined thing. I would have to essentially sketch very, very roughly, and then I would... And I mean... Again, it's an iterative process where it's like you would start with a very hazy mass, and then I would say, okay, well... Almost it becomes more like sculpture at that point where it's like, okay, you start with a very vague outline and then you slightly trim it and trim it and trim it until now it's the shape it should be. If I had to give the best visual idea, because I still think my surgery thing is like, that's, again, I've never actually experienced that, but it's like the idea of the brain thinking that it sees something that it definitely doesn't, where it's like for example, I feel like I would, if you were to say to visualize an apple and then to show me, if you could somehow, and again, this would, I don't know if this would ever be possible. It's like if you could show me what the image of the apple that I am pretending to see, it's like if you could somehow extract that from my mind and then show it to me, I would recognize it as going, yes, that's the apple I'm imagining. But it wouldn't be because I see it. It's almost as if I feel like it still feels like a neurological map. Like I know what synapses would fire.
That's, at least to me, the way I'm interpreting that phrase that you just said is experiential. You're smelling
because you can hack that without it being there. You can hack that. Like again, that's what is happening when they do the brain probes things. It's like they can make you feel like you're feeling the sensation despite the fact that you're not.
Well, I don't know why you're redounding to that. What I'm saying is,
the reason I redound to that is because it means that it's not like I just don't know what an apple looks like and I have to look at one every time. No, I'm not saying that. It's like I have a platonic concept of an apple. Well, but my platonic concept is an abstract. Again, it's an abstract experience where it's like, again, if you could show me the apple that I'm quote picturing, I would know that it was the same apple because it would know fire.
That it was yours.
I would say
that you were the author of it.
I think so, because it's like I would know that it's the theoretical synapse firing, because it's almost as if I'm running a simulation of like, if my eyes were to see the apple, these neurons would activate in this way. Now, obviously, I'm not saying it's that complex. Well, but I'm saying, like, complex. Would you know, here's what it would look like. If you could extract that neurological map, recreate the image, and then show it to me, I think I would be well enough... I would have well enough an understanding to say that's the neurological maps are the same. That's the apple I was picturing, rather than just a stock image of an apple.
But that's a feeling. So
it is more like an. I guess the best way I describe it is it's an impression of an apple.
Huh.
Like, again, it's the gravitational pull that I recognize in all the things around the apple, but I'm not seeing the apple.
See, that's interesting. Again, I wonder whether that's a broad versus detailed thing, because, like, literally, when I draw... I don't think so,
because there's people who are far more in the middle of this.
Drawing an apple...
Because some people are like, yes, I see it, but I see it almost as if it's like a grainy photograph, where it's like...
Oh, that's terrible.
It's not clear, but it's definitely like, I can kind of see it.
And again, you don't even get that.
Not usually.
Okay, see, so
sometimes there's an element of, like, I could sort of... project a very hazy concept of an apple.
Then in that case, yes, I see it. If you define it that way, I will then say resolutely that I do see it. Like, to me, I wouldn't need somebody to show me the picture or the image that was from my head, because I know what the stem looks like. I know where the glisten spot from the light is.
I would say that I know these things as well, but they're impressions.
Yeah, but that impression...
It's almost, again, like the concept of the sculpture, where it's literally like going, okay, you take off the things that you know, it's like, okay, no, I know that this is a part of it, so I know that this needs to stay, whereas I go, no, that's not right. That's not what I'm imagining. And yet it's not because I'm looking at them going, these don't add up. It's literally like, that's not firing the right synapses. Now, I don't think that's in that exact... I wouldn't... Yes, obviously that's far more neurological language, and I don't know enough... I'm not a neurologist, so I can't say that I'm using those words accurately, but it's like, in some ways, because the original person I saw writing about this is actually was a professional artist who describes this, and so it's not inherently tied to creativity. Like, it wouldn't be a big five, if you're high in openness, you're also going to be high in this. Because she was going, like, I have a career of doing this, and she even postulated, it's like, I wonder if it might be that my interest in art arose as a sort of compensation for a lack of the ability to do it natively, because there's an element of, like, I could certainly sketch over time exactly the apple I'm thinking of, because I would know that it wasn't right. But it's not a...
You would literally start with a rough image of what...
Yeah, it's not a... What are those quizzes, like the find the difference pictures? I'm going, no, this isn't right. It would literally be like, okay, a quick thing... That's not exactly what I think it should be, and then you keep iterating, but it is not a one-to-one. Oh, here it is, and here's the recreation. It's sort of
of course, keep iterating, because the fact that, like, even if I see the apple's picture perfect in my head, as I pen onto the paper, it's going to be slightly imperfect.
But see, that's a matter of discipline, because some people describe In fact, there's probably a great deal of, there could be some very serious scholarship in the various ways people approach art of saying that the ability to see it might compensate for, perhaps a lack of ability to actually draw it. Whereas there are people who think, no, I see it, I just can't get it to look, I can't get my hands to do it.
Right.
And I feel like I'm the opposite. I can't see it, but I definitely can get my hands to do it. And I kind of like the person in the video's description. It's like, I wonder if that might actually be why you do it that way, is because you're compensating for the inability to see it by sort of saying, this is what it would look like if I could see it. And so I just thought that it would almost, I almost think, again, I'm having to speak so metaphorically about it, but it's like you said, the idea of a superimposed, like, holographic image of an apple over.
That's what
I almost think it would be the opposite of, like, imagine projecting what I actually do see over a screen that has an apple slightly pressed up against it. That sounds kind of vague, but it's like, imagine if you took a projection screen and you put an apple right behind it such that it was touching the screen and vaguely disforming it.
Okay.
And then project what I actually see onto that, where it's like, I know where I'm pictures, like I could pick where on the desk am I going to picture the apple. And then the projection of what I see sort of might be slightly distorted in that area, but it is far from what I would call seeing it. Mm. I almost feel like this is not dissimilar to how, not in a grandiose sense, but like visionary in the sense of like a vision, where it's almost like I saw something I couldn't explain, and so now I'm trying to recreate it to. That's more of a trope than it is a real thing, but like this idea that it's a trope that exists in a lot of supernatural things, where it's like I saw a thing in a vision or something, and then they sort of go nuts continually sketching it because they're trying to recreate what the thing that they saw.
Sure. That's
almost what it is, where it's like I know what it should look like, but I can't actually get anything to see it that way. Unless you hypnotize yourself with hallucinations. Who knows where that goes?
We'll find out.
But it's all over.
We'll update you next week.
It's over for the rest of you if I do that. Because I'm not trying to be facetious or trying to be not facetious. Can't think of the word. Self-aggrandizing, but it's like I think there's almost a part of me that's like, because I've had to compensate for this because I didn't know that it was a thing. If I ever actually did gain the ability to be like, I'll be unstoppable. Because now I would be able to visualize it, and because I've practiced the technique of recreating, it would be like, then I probably could be like, yep, I see it, and there it is, one try. And then everybody else is screwed.
I don't know, Well, I think in the same way that there's effort on both sides to say, like, if you can see it but you can't necessarily communicate it with your hands or what have you, that's obviously the training is necessary there to bring that out. But I think in the same way, if you can train your brain to create a visual picture, that's something that's still a learned skill, it sounds like.
Well, if that's the case, now I don't know that I think it's a fairly new concept.
To say it's learned, or to say that
it could be perhaps improved, but there's at least some people who suggest that they've tried the methods and actually have had success. And so that's where that's because I had already been curious about the whole hallucination thing. When I first heard this, I was like, well, that seems like the perfect opportunity just to do them at the same time. Because that, I just think it's like, that would be a fascinating thing. Even then, there's a part of me that's like, even if it only became a thing that was like, I can only visualize in this instance, that would still be something that's like, I would probably still do that fairly regularly then, just for the sake of it. Be like, it's a Sunday afternoon, I'm just going to go hypnotize myself, I'm going to go make myself hallucinate. Now, they actually did say, and this, who knows how believable this is, but there was some, I don't recall if it was Archimedes or Pythagoras, it was one of the great sort of Greek inventors.
Let's say suggested, because I'm a fan of his.
Well, it would make sense, and he was weird enough that it might be the case, that they said he actually used to go into pitch black caves because he, at least the claim was that he was, in his own words, receiving wisdom. And the thought is that it may have been that the reason he sought out pitch blackness is that he was attempting to reach that same sense of sensory deprivation, which induced some forms of hallucinations which it could be, if you're a mathematically minded person, that could end up being somewhat trip experience, like where it's like you start to see interesting like fractal geometric shapes and the like. So that's entirely possible. And of course, I don't know if there's any history to prove that is what he did, but who knows?
I mean, it would certainly make sense, I suppose, in that sense.
I just think that there's an interesting notion of like, if it was possible to induce hallucinations, why wouldn't you? Unless you were afraid of what you might see, which you might have reason to be if you're not very
Is it my
self-aware.
therapy session now? Is that what this is?
What am I? No. Unless you feel like it needs to be, you brought that up, so perhaps it is. Are you projecting your need for therapy?
No, I'm just saying that was awfully pointy.
Give me I'll get the ping pong ball out. Why? I was saying if you could, why wouldn't you?
Which
I was saying hypothetically.
No, I'm not saying hypothetically. I'm saying as somebody who can visualize.
But I don't think that's. I feel like a characteristic of hallucinations is that they are not voluntary.
That's true.
And that's where I think you could make a much more strong case that they could have a subconscious element.
Yes. Because
you're not consciously making them.
I'm actually curious. Have you heard of the Silva method before?
That doesn't ring a bell.
These people, it's a bit of it does get into the hyperbolic spirituality weirdness that's like, okay, what? But
I'll say, what is it?
Basically, what these scientists have tried to, and it's a bit of pseudoscience at this point, but they've tried to trigger certain times in certain ways, be it a particular position or whatever it is, similar to meditation, that triggers either an alpha or theta or whatever wave in your brain. And it's a bit like, okay,
is it or is it an actual auditory based? Because I've heard of the whole binaural beats thing.
No. But I mean, like the notion
I was curious, but it is also
this particular one is more similar to like how to bring on like
brain waves?
No, but how to bring on like a flow state kind of thing, those types of elements.
But it's not auditory based.
It's not auditory based.
Because there was a whole thing for that, which was like, if you listen to these kinds of sounds, you'll sync your brain waves in a way, and that turned out to be mostly
No, this one it's more like when you teach your brain, it's more similar to lucid dreaming concept.
So
where
it's almost like Pavlovian brainwave?
Yeah, literally. It's like if you teach your brain that this is the time that alpha wave functions or theta wave functions, then you can go, okay, I'm now entering that zone right now. And
I don't think you need to train, because I mean, I'll admit...
Because the theta wave arguably is where you would be able to communicate.
Well, I don't disagree with the concept. But even then, I don't know how well brainwaves are understood, really, because I haven't done the research. But I mean, I can understand the notion that's like there are the concept of brainwaves. I'm not disputing that they exist. The idea that they could be, I think the idea that, or even I wouldn't even say that they can't be. But the idea that they have like some magical power, I think, is obviously silly. It's like your brain responds in different ways based on certain stimuli.
It's more like.
But I also don't think you need a method. Like I'll admit, I have had times when I've been painting where it's literally like I feel like I'm smashing my head against the wall. Where it's like I'm trying to focus, and your brain is literally just going like, nope, any distraction, we're gonna run with it and go. And then you'll have, and then I'll. As a matter of fact, this is one of the things is like I've recently realized that music is a hit and miss, because there are times when it's like I get a good playlist going.
Oh, interesting.
And it acts as like a creative sort of inspiration where it's like, while I'm working on something, the music sort of helps add to the ambience. And there's also times when the music gets so in the way where I'll literally just pause because I'm frustrated. And then suddenly I'll be like, I've been painting for the last 45 minutes in silence with my headphones still on. Because it's like, finally I managed to break through. But I don't think there's any, like, conditioning. I think it's just a matter of, like, you just have to bash your head against the wall until eventually you get in there.
Well, sure.
And I think that I think it's far more an element of just... I don't disagree that there are certainly probably ways, perhaps, to make that easier. But if it's any... I mean, how pseudoscience-y does it get?
No, this particular method, to my understanding, based on what I've seen so far.
Focus is just a thing you can
No,
practice.
it's not purely focus, because they talk about flow state, which is more of like the focus concept, but one of the things they get at, and I would say the actual waves are fairly well understood, because people have mapped like sleep and those types of things, and obviously you go through all the waves for sleep purposes, and they do talk about what parts of your brain are active at various states and things like that, so they understand those things fairly well, but like theta is more responsible for creative thinking, those types of things.
Do we understand what actually causes them is my point.
No,
to say that we
point.
know that your brain does this when it's in this state, but to say that we know how to get your brain to hack it into that state is where I go.
This is what they're getting at. It's very much the Pavlovian thing of like just pattern based. And so, like for instance,
well, if you do
when
the
you're
same
in a
thing
flow
every
state,
day,
right? So when you're in a flow state, or say like,
it's also why they say you should never do anything in your bed but sleep.
Every time consistently you're in a theta wave, you drink a cup of tea. It's like, okay,
well, so
now when I drink
it
is. So when I drink a cup of tea now, I'm in theta wave.
But this is exactly the same concept as why they say you shouldn't do anything other than sleep in bed, because it creates in your brain 100%. The association that, oh, I'm in bed, I should sleep.
100%.
Well, then that doesn't seem that pseudoscience. That just seems kind of obvious, though.
It's obvious, but it's really difficult to me, because I go, as much as you train your brain to do that,
it's still not perfect, though.
It's not perfect, and the thing that's hard for me
in the same sense that like lucid dreaming is never
such
been perfect.
Theta is such a elusive thing, because you almost are. I wouldn't say you're non-conscious, but I mean, there's a degree of like you aren't.
Yeah, so I mean,
your agency is temporarily set aside. That sounds really strange.
No, well, see, I don't disagree, because I think you can voluntarily set your agency aside. In some ways, I think that's the only way to get into that state, is literally to go, screw what I want, I'm doing it. Like, I've had times where literally it's like, okay, I've been trying this, I've been in a creative endeavor, it's like I've been trying to get consistency out of this, and it's not working, and you just tell your brain, screw what you want. You could sit here trying to distract me, but if you eventually just sort of go, I'm going to do it anyways. I do think you can brute force your way into it, but it takes a level of determination that is it's exhausting. And then if you think of like, oh, I don't want, my hobby to be something that literally exhausts me, because that's quite literally the opposite of what most people seek in a hobby. So I think it's something you can always force. It's just the amount of effort that takes is sometimes not equivalent to what people actually want out of the experience.
The way I would describe...
Because I also think, even in manual labor, I've done jobs where it's like, you can literally... In fact, when I did package moving...
You get brainless.
It's literally like you just go in and you clock out, and it's like, all thoughts go away, because no matter how much I think about how I don't want to be here, or how I'm hot and tired...
Yeah.
It's like, screw that, because I can't leave now.
Right.
So all my agency, I don't think agency is the right word, but it's like all my consciousness will do is distract. So you can essentially just go, it's almost a deliberate dissociative experience where you just go, I'm literally choosing to separate my thoughts from my physical actions.
Sure.
Because they're no longer, in this present moment, they're not correlated.
Well, and this is I would describe it this way. This is an interesting anecdote that I'll use and I talk about this a lot as a martial artist, but when you are training, you want the tools and the shapes and the things like that you're learning and the methodologies of response to not only replace your body's natural response, right, but to become instinctual in that
you don't think about them.
In that they become muscle memory, which to me is different, and I'll explain why. In active and conscious memory, you're going, this is a choice I'm making, here's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Whereas muscle memory is my body is functioning almost
autonomically.
Yeah. And so I go, like, for instance, I get into a car, and my new car, we just bought a new car. And so I get into my car now, and the brake is one of those, like, push to set it and then push again to unset it. But the hood pop is where my brake used to be. That muscle memory was so ingrained that each time I put it into reverse or drive or whatever, my brain goes, you must do that because we're not ready yet.
Pop the hood.
And it's like, no, I have to now untrain that muscle group.
But that's also funny, because I've noticed another kind of weird experience where Jordan Peterson talks about how your perceptions are actually far more teleologically based than sensory based, where it's like you perceive a thing not by its physical sense, but by its actual utility first, in some cases, where he actually describes how, like, infants fear ledges without knowing that they are like, oh, this is a place I could fall and be hurt. It's actually like...
Right, it's not the logic.
It's an instinctual level of, like, this is a thing that hurts.
Right.
The form it takes is irrelevant, but, like, teleologically, this is hurting thing.
Right.
And you can sense that first before... It's just in similar the way why you can actually see... Like, children can watch a movie they've never seen and be like, oh, he's the meanie, he's the bad guy. And, I mean, on some level, you might say, well, that's just good character design. But I think... Yes,
sometimes
but good character design is tapping into a... I mean, again, it comes down to a collective unconscious kind of concept. That it's like you're representing a primordial, like, this is what... Why do you got to make noise? You're representing a primordial villain thing in the same sense that you're showing someone this is bad thing. Regardless of its physical sense, teleologically, it is the bad thing. And I think... I have had similar experiences where it's like on more than one occasion when I have gotten out my keys when I'm trying to unlock the door, I will try to use my car clicker. I've never actually tried to use it to unlock the house door, but I have on multiple occasions gotten it out and like held it as though I was about to use it before I realized that's the wrong key.
Right.
Because you're on that menu, it's like, oh, this is the unlocking thing. Well, it's like, well, yes, but not for this door. Or I have, if I'm engrossed in a thought topic or in a conversation, I sometimes will slow down at a green light because my brain knows that I'm focusing on the conversation or on what I'm thinking. So on a kind of background level, like the driving brain goes, traffic light is a thing,
traffic light, I must stop.
And it's not. Well, it's not even that I must stop. It's almost like.
My eyes aren't giving me any input.
The lower brain knows that it's like, hey, the higher brain isn't paying enough attention, so I'm just going to slow because that's the safe option. Because it would be better for me to stop at a green light than go at a red light. So I'll be like, but I've never come to a complete stop at a green light.
100%.
I've gotten I'll slow down and then eventually it's like the lower brain gets a hold of the higher brain and be like, hey, I just need input on this thing. Is this a yes or no? And then I find like, oh yes, and then we go and I speed up again. So I think that there is, it's an interesting...
So, but that's what I'm getting at when it comes to trying to get to a place where you're in the same way that you transition in martial arts.
I think teleology is a part of it, though, isn't it?
Mental memory to and active memory to muscle memory. In that same manner, I think if you keep that same principle
it's
and
almost
use
habituation.
it for it is, but you use it for the moving into theta, whatever, you can get yourself to the point that you're going, no, I'm now moving into a place where, again, as you said, your higher level thinking is put to the side for a second so that you can literally communicate with the subconscious. Now, that's always been a fascination for people, I believe, because it is a bit, and I'm going to wax poetic for a second.
Go ahead.
It's a bit of the exploring the unknown within yourself. It's I'm kind of venturing out into the void, but it's internal. It's within me. And there are so few people that even really care or have any concern for that kind of stuff. A lot of people are
afraid of such a concept.
Sure, but
they wouldn't know it was them.
But to me, the fascinating thing with that is understanding yourself.
We got to talk about DMT now, because there is a part of me that's like, some people would make the claim that it's like, well, if you take drugs and you see a thing, and you see like a person, which is a common occurrence, specifically with DMT, it's like, how do you know that that's not some external entity? And I'm like, I suppose you can't know, but I would find that would be quite the metaphysical claim, to be like, everyone who takes DMT sees the same thing, and it's an external entity.
Well,
I'm like, well, I don't know. And I'm also like, I'm not, because not everybody sees things on DMT, but it's like, it's more of the concept of those who see it tends to see similar things.
Well, and at that point, is it?
And then how do you know that it's like, well, maybe they knew because of the reputation.
Right, I was about to say.
So it's like, so then it would just be, is it just your subconscious that you're talking to? Because a lot of people say, no, it's like I had a conversation with it and it felt so distinctly not like me.
Yeah, but that's
like, but it's your brain that tells you it's not like you.
Right.
So for all you know, that's your brain lying to your brain. Your brain does very good at doing that to you, at lying to itself. Yeah. So I don't know about. I think it's weird.
Well, and there is a part of you. I'm going to get somewhat theological here, but there's parts of you, and this kind of gets into the shadow integration principles, but there's parts of you that you don't want to look at that are there. Unflattering. Right, but they're there nonetheless, and it's like you can't deny that they are a part of who you are. Well, you can't go, well, that's not
but
me.
It won't work.
Right. It's like you'd be much rather off to going, okay, that's something that I love Crime and Punishment for this. It's like, that's something I'm capable of.
Yeah.
And yet, that's, I
don't know that that's the worst example for me personally, because I found that a little bit of a...
Too
personal? Well, no, perhaps...
I felt like it was...
No, see, if anything, I thought it was the opposite. Perhaps because I was already like, yeah, everyone's capable of this. Perhaps Dostoevsky felt like he had to kind of... show, like, yes, we're all capable. But I was like, from the beginning, I'm like, no, of course it makes sense.
In his
era, yes.
Yeah,
perhaps.
His context.
Because I'm just like, the whole time he's going, perhaps this is his way of coaxing everyone to be like, oh, we could all do it. And I'm just like, from the very beginning, I'm like, this whiny kid. Of course we could all do it.
He's not.
He's a little bit.
You feel like he's whiny.
Well, he's a little bit melodramatic. Maybe not whiny, but he's very melodramatic. Right? It's like, I don't know. Maybe I just felt like it was.
I felt like some of his internal monologues were my favorite parts of the book. Like the idea of him arguing with himself that he's so kind of on a social level, he's not very demonstrative, and yet he's about to murder somebody. It's like that's a rather funny dichotomy. But
I think that this is just an element of. Maybe I felt like it was sort of. Because it was obvious, it was too drawn out. Whereas perhaps if perhaps to people to whom it's not obvious, it does take that long of a.
I don't know that it was.
Here's all the monologue
obvious.
that I need to.
As much as it was, again, seeing that internal strain and struggle is interesting in the same manner that trying to talk to your own subconscious is interesting. I mean, it's like.
Sure, but. I don't know. The monologues were always the parts that I was just like, okay.
Really? That's the melodramatic parts that you don't like?
Yeah, I was just like, okay, yeah, I get it, kid.
You peg him as a little bit more of a whiny
He's very
peasant.
Angsty.
Sure.
Very angsty. And I'm just like, I mean, I'm not to say, maybe this is just the disagreeableness in my personality trait where it's like, no offense, but the idea that you could kill someone is not a thought that I'm like, I could never. I'm like, no, there's definitely people I'd be like, the world wouldn't miss you. Now, I'm not saying that I would ever do it. But the idea that, like, oh, I could never do it.
But to actually walk through the streets in order to fantasize about it is a little bit more of an extra step. Like, if you started doing that, I'd have to take you away. You've done that before, haven't you?
I've had dreams that have been weird where it's like... I've had those kinds of weird dreams. It's like, where you... What? What?
No
one's gonna know what that was about. Now I sound crazy. That was your whole fun. Do. Kill you live on the mic. I suppose it's the fact that and again, I'm sure some people would say that, well, because you've never actually been in that scenario, you still can never know, and that's true, of course. But there's also a part of me that's like, again, almost because of the whole concept of the dissociative element, it's like, there is a part of me that feels like if I were conscripted into some kind of, like, if things were to really, truly go to pot, and I got conscripted into something, I feel like the idea that I could be driven to kill people is not a shocking thought. That I'd be like, it would take...
Not as much push as people think.
Yes, and I think maybe that's what I think the book had to be like. Here's the processes, and I'm like, I'm aware that it doesn't take this much.
Right.
So the fact that it felt like it was constantly having to explain things that I felt like where I'm like, yeah, I get it. Because I guess being a more again going back to the idea of I think there is I think a separate personality trait which is introspectiveness, or at least it could be like a meta personality trait, like how. Even the your own interest in personality.
Where are you? Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's like even your own interest in personality tests would imply that you're someone who is interested in your own personality discovery.
I think that there are some people, and I kind of go back to a bit of that book that and I can't recall the author at this point, but
I can't recall the book, so
the type 1 and type 2 functions, like when you're functioning in the...
I don't, yeah.
And it's the whole idea that most people want to, or I should say maybe are content to, function within their type 1 response on a psychological level, which is very just almost visceral and instinctual. And you're going, well, but if you live your entire life that way, that's awfully sad. I mean... Because you're not capturing or taking a hold of... You will be very
much blown about by just things that happen.
100%. Yep.
Life will happen to you rather than the other way around.
There you go. Don't let that happen to you.
Well, or, I mean, it's a little bit of the stoic thing. It's like, yeah, you absolutely can. Again, but you have to own it. You can have whatever you're willing to own. We had this, the idea of, like, yeah, I had this whole thought, again, this was another one of my early morning random thought trains that I just went off on. I was like,
stopping at stoplights.
The idea that it's like, absolutely...
somebody's honking at me.
I don't have that many stoplights, thankfully, on my way to work, because it's all on the highway, but the concept of, like, prison as an idea is, it's like, you realize that anyone willing to go to prison can do whatever the heck they want.
Yeah.
Because think about it. I was like, think about it philosophically. It's like, what are the only things preventing someone from breaking the law? And and you have to make the assumption at the first that this is like of just moral law, not just like a corrupt law. A moral person could break a corrupt law. Whereas if we're assuming that this is a just law that is morally correct, then the only two things that I think you could make the claim that prevent anyone from breaking it is their own moral justice, their own sense of moral integrity, and the threat of punishment. Mm-hmm. Which means that if someone does not have moral integrity, if we assume that a person who doesn't have moral integrity, in the same sense that a morally upright person does not need the law to behave morally uprightly. Right. So anyone willing to behave contrary to moral justice, then the only thing that prevents them from breaking the law is the threat of prison. Right. At which point, if they're not afraid of that, you've given them free rein.
You've just made the best case for why gun control wouldn't work.
Well, or it's a good case for I'm not sure.
Libertarianism?
Well, no, I was going to say it's a case for a radical rethinking of the prison system. Because I think you kind of either have to go... You got to go to either extreme. You got to be Sweden, where it's basically a giant rehab facility. And there's studies that show that works in its own way. Sure, I don't know. I've not done enough research. But it's like, my opinion is, it's like you either have to go all the way to that extreme, or it should be literally like the Chateau d'If, where it's like, okay, you're eating bread in a stone room that you will never leave till you're dead. Like, because I think that's the kind of prison that would actually deter people. Right. This idea of it's like, oh yeah,
I get to watch TV and work out and go
and that's not to say like, oh, isn't prison just a cakewalk? Because I know that people. The thing that makes, from what I gather of the people who talk about it, it's like the thing that makes prison frightening is actually just being around other prisoners.
Yeah, but that's dumb.
Well, no, because it's an actual threat. Because it's like, again, you're going to be in there amongst the people who weren't afraid of prison, which means they're not going to be afraid of doing anything to you either. Because they're already in prison, they can't be threatened with more prison at that point. So these are people who literally have free reign. They can do whatever the heck they want because they're already there.
Sure.
And so the thing that most people describe as being terrible about prison is the other people. Like the amenities in terms of it's like, yeah, you get fed and you've got basically everything provided for you in a sense, but you have to sort of keep on guard amongst these other people who are absolutely insane. Whereas it's like, that's not... So that, I guess there's a deterrent in that sense, but it's only a deterrent to those who would be at the bottom of a prison hierarchy.
Right.
Whereas those at the top of the prison hierarchy, it's like, literally nothing can stop them because they're already in prison. So more prison's not much of a threat. At which point, they can do whatever the heck they want.
Yep.
So you either have to make prison so horrible, or you just, I mean... At that point, you make the argument that if a life imprisonment is a death sentence, so let's just speed it up.
Well,
because it's essentially death by prison. If you're just going to say you're going to die in this prison, but the taxpayer is going to spend the next 60 years paying for you.
Well, that's certainly.
Well, you could just say you're going to die in prison next week. Prison will kill you next week. Let's just make it the prison. Yeah. How did we get onto that though? Talking about the concept of, and you can do whatever, you can have anything you're willing to own.
Yep.
And various.
So if you want to murder somebody, feel free.
Well, if you're willing to go to prison, I suppose I have no reason to stop you other than that I don't think you should. On a moral level, but chances are if you're wanting to commit murder, you're probably also not on that level. I'm just like, well, in that case, literally, what's the stop? The only other stop would be someone who stops you, like a physical force.
All I had to say, hallucinate instead, kids.
Well, who knows what you'll see.